Greetings, welcome to part 3 on how to program drums. I'm going to continue immediately on from last week's video where I was talking about metric modulations.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3.
So to really simply break down and just quickly explain what is actually going on there, I've just gone back to the standard Purdie Shuffle pattern here, right? And just to make this really easy to kind of visualize and understand, I'm going to drag all of these notes up to the hi-hat. Once again, I'm going to set the hi-hat to be the same fixed velocity so that it's kind of a bit more of a static kind of, you know, like the trap beat kind of thing. With the triplet groove, there's 3 notes per beat. So you can see between this space here, you've got 3 notes, right? The accent of the snare is happening like with that. It's kind of going with the triplet. So, and the really easy way to just kind of achieve that trippy result is just to count in. If I want to make this beat feel like it's in 4/4, for example, then I'm just going to count along the number of hi-hats until I get to 4 hits rather than 3. So I think it's that one there, and that should give me, yeah. So that already, you can see now I've got 4 hits in between the snare and the kick, and that's kind of making it sound like it's going, you know, hoo ha, hoo dibby dubby dibby dee da. And then that's going to be the next part there. And yeah. So that loops a little bit weirdly. I like to try and double the pattern or make it go on a little bit longer until I kind of hit the point where the pattern resets around back to the 1. So let's just see if I can do that. What happens there? So that's pretty weird, and yeah, it's kind of helpful. I like to just try to come up with some sort of phrasing here in this last little extra beat that sort of ends up happening. And if I turn the metronome back on, let's like re-highlight the 3/4 pulse, just to make this kind of even weirder. And yeah, just pretty much with that going, that hi-hat going constant like that, and then just depending on where I put the kick and snare accents underneath it, I can just shift the perception around and make it feel like it's changing time signature without doing that. This is a trick that a lot of modern drummers like to use, you know, people like Nate Smith and stuff like that. It's a pretty common jazz or like kind of fusion drumming technique I think you hear a lot nowadays. If you just try and chuck this in with musicians who aren't ready for it, it can go all over the place. But I think most people nowadays listen to a lot of music where this happens and you're just like, what's going on? This is basically it. I mean, it's pretty simple, to be honest, like when you break it down like this, I think so. And then obviously it's up to you to kind of get more creative. And maybe we could do that in like 5. So that's a fun one. Okay, so it's all still in triplets, but that is essentially the trick. This kind of dumb example hopefully demystifies or simplifies some kind of advanced rhythmic concepts. And this is kind of what I meant in part 1 by saying that drum program is pretty easy to understand if you think about it in terms of dividing small numbers into each other like this, and sort of thinking about how to fit groupings of 6 notes into the space of 4 beats or vice versa. And patterns like this can be really fun practice to kind of mess around with and get your head around that idea. When you program drums on a grid like this, and especially these kind of weird patterns, and you have it running against a metronome like that, you just kind of start to understand what it is real drummers are doing, and I think it really helps to just demystify what is going on in some kind of more complex types of music. A slightly different one, but one that is also useful to know how to do, is kind of like swing fill or like kind of UK garage type beats. So really interesting. This time I got the tempo or the BPM set to around 140, and yeah, you can kind of range it from about 130 to 145-ish, I think, for this kind of style. It's the offbeat hi-hat thing, or the offbeat accent, that's kind of the most important thing. So you kind of start out with something like this. But yeah, how do you make it kind of swing? Well, there's a couple ways to do it, because the thing about garage, it's this kind of like galloping, gives it that kind of skipping or kind of galloping feeling, doesn't it? So you kind of like need this little, it's got this kind of like little quieter hi-hat thing happening before the offbeat accent, so you end up with something a bit like this. It's a little bit robotic, so what you can do is you can highlight everything, and you can use this swing slider here to kind of, and you can see what that does. That will nudge over only those. So whilst that does work, I don't really like using the swing slider because it's kind of like an unspecified value. Versus, like, you've got this menu here, you've got these different options for quantizing by different values. So for example, if I select 16 swing C, you can see that it just kind of snapped everything to a swing value, but it's specific. So if you're doing any layering of like other sequencing or MIDI, you know, like other maybe like arpeggiators and stuff like that, it's kind of important to actually have things at the same swing value. Basically, the higher the letter is kind of like the higher the strength of it. If I set that to F, yeah, it kind of increases the swing and the skippiness of that feeling, or the feeling of the groove, you know, and it kind of starts to get a little bit silly and a little bit cartoonish. So I'm just going to set it back to C. And then what you can do is basically just like to pepper in some more stuff happening here. I'm just going to click in some random hits around the place, and I'm going to do it all on grid values because I can just quantize it in a second. So yeah, that's pretty much what all these kind of swing values can be used for. So going a bit further down the rabbit hole, we can get into sort of more tuplet-y weirdness. So let's do the good old trusty kick and snare again. And I'm going to just kind of try and eye up 5 notes here, because what I'm going to do is try and a sort of quintuplet groove type of thing. And a quintuplet is where you're kind of fitting 5 notes into the space of a 4/4 measure. You've got this option here for 5 tuplets. So if I do that, you can see it's just more evenly spaced those out. So this will sound pretty crazy, but if you're not used to the sound of like 5 tuplets, it can take a little while to get your brain used to the feel of it, but it's quite useful with the metronome on, I think, to help understand what's going on here. So these first 2 bars here are going to be your sort of standard trappy thing, and then it's going to go into the quintuplets to kind of show the difference in sound. Yeah, that's kind of how you can get into that kind of weird drunk groove, or you know, kind of trippy, experimental, kind of modern jazz or wonky math kind of vibes. So hopefully these patterns and the ideas that I've shown today should really help form an understanding of how to get any kind of groove or style out of this, and they should have hopefully clearly explained what all the kind of musical results you can expect to get from all of these quantization values are, and basically what they're all intended for. So I tend to mainly just find myself using the values that I've shown you in the video today for most grooves, and yeah, just to summarise, the 8th note triplets thing will get you that kind of shuffled feel, which is a bit of a staple of modern hip-hop and electronic music nowadays, as well as jazz fusion and progressive rock and metal. It's also the value that I would use to get kind of swing jazz feeling drums like this kind of thing. So despite the fact that these are called swing values, and for example, this beat is kind of a swing jazz thing, there's a distinction between these things and the triplet swing. And you'll hear that if I put one of these swing values on this kind of groove, it'll just mess it up. So it's not doing quite. It's not quite the same as that. Even though that's called swing, yeah, there's just kind of an important difference, I think, between these two kinds of swings. Hopefully that just sort of really simply made sense of that. And then, yeah, of course, you've got like the quintuplet tools, which would just help for getting into weirdness. But of course, if I just slap that on a pattern like this again, it'll make it weird. So yeah, before you start getting into quintuplet things, maybe just have a look at the way that I kind of approached doing it first before, so you can kind of help make sense of what you're doing, because otherwise it's just a little bit, it sounds unintentional and a bit random if you just try and slap or apply things like that to like this before. I don't think I've ever touched these bottom 3 ones in my entire life. Hopefully that kind of demystifies this menu a little bit in terms of what all of these are for or what they can do. Yeah, I'm going to switch over to my final example here, which is quite a leap from kind of swing jazz. I'm going to go into a kind of metal groove now, just to kind of illustrate how you can use the same tools to come up with something completely different. So I'm here with this kind of fast, stabby metal groove. It's basically all in straight 16th notes, like pretty much on the grid, but you'll see throughout this, you'll see in here throughout this, there's moments where it goes into triplets. There's some cymbal catches and kind of little runs and little dynamic moments. And I think by now, if I play this, you'll be able to understand how it's programmed without even having to look at what's going on. So let's give that a go quickly. I'll keep up the visual display of the drums because it looks cool. So these vocal samples are by a dude called Will Gardner, who some people might know from a band called Black Peaks or his new project, Every Hell. I recorded Will doing a bunch of these together for a sample pack that we made, so I've just chucked them in here for a bit of context. And then, you know, I've pretty much used the same methods that I've been using for every other beat in this video to program this, but I've just thought about it in terms of the drummer approaching it with a metal technique, particularly in regards to the kick drum. It's like I'm thinking about being aware of the fact that a drummer's probably got a double pedal to play this kind of music, as opposed to trying to do that with a single foot. So, you know, things like that is much more feasible with a double kick. It's kind of thinking about which parts of this groove are being played with the single foot roll technique or where you're using a double pedal, because it kind of subtly affects things like that. It's really useful to kind of set the tempo to double the speed of whatever the groove is actually at. So you can hear that china is just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but the click track is actually going twice that fast. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And like I was saying in part 1, I think it just makes your life so much easier for programming, you know, grooves like this and kind of more technical stuff where there's a lot of hits or a lot of rhythmic details happening, and especially a little fast, that little cheeky, that kind of. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for all of this part. But yeah, I'm going to wrap this up here for today. Thanks very much for watching, and yeah, take it easy.